Boast, understanding the state of digital transformation for R&D cost capitalization and R&D tax credits. So a little bit about Boast, in case everybody hasn't heard about us yet. We'll go to that next slide here. Boast is actually one of the world's largest R&D tax credit software companies. We've been around for over a decade, since 2011. Over 1,000 customers at Boast, 120 employees, and I think that's even growing, and 350 million in tax credits that we filed so far. So we're going to share some expertise where we did some interesting original research in the market around digital transformation. So excited to do that. But before we get into that, just going to talk about our hosts here today. Myself, I'm Russ Armstrong, VP of Sales and Strategy here at Boast. And we also have Ashley Crawford on the line. And Ashley, you tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Crawford. I'm a manager here in our R&D and tax credit practice. I'm excited to be speaking with you all today.
Fantastic. So before we get into it too deep, if you do have any questions, you can pop them into the chat or the Q&A session, and we'll get to those as soon as we can throughout the session. But really diving into this here, what we were really interested in is just understanding the state of digital transformation for R&D cost capitalization and R&D tax credits. We see digital transformation everywhere in the world. It's such a big buzzword right now within technology companies and financial institutions and trying to figure this all out. We wanted to understand how people were approaching it from a different perspective on things like that R&D cost cap and R&D tax credits. So we're going to share some of the findings we got on this. Obviously, we've got a full report on this. So if you haven't seen the full report, feel free to reach out and we'll get that sent over to you. All original research and gives you insights into many aspects of these different categories. And we'll go through some of these today and some of the interesting things that we learned about this. All right, we'll jump into our next slide here. So some of the key findings, what we thought was really interesting. We were trying to figure out how long people were spending on this and what they were doing to do it. So over 50% of our respondents were spending more than 11 hours per quarter for gathering and analyzing data for their R&D tax claims. So that was one of the key interesting things that we found about that. On top of that, what we thought was really interesting is 62% of the respondents were still using Excel for their primary tool. So nobody's really kind of moved outside that realm of using Excel. As we all know, Excel's got a lot of limitations to it in terms of being able to have a systematic process involved with it. So there was definitely some challenges with that. But also another thing that we thought was really interesting is that people are starting to move to a proactive process for doing this. So 70% of the respondents were doing it proactively. They were doing it manually in Excel, but at least they were doing it proactively and not waiting till the end of the year. But first, we wanted to kind of get this high level approach here of digital transformation, understanding how this is important for you. And I mean, everybody has different priorities on how they're setting this up and changing their organization. So we wanted to understand just from our people who participated in the survey, how important is it to do digital transformation for them? And it was a really high priority on a lot of their lists. So 8 out of 10, which says one side of it, but the biggest challenge with digital transformation we see it from a lot of buyers across the board is how do you implement digital transformation? What should I be focusing on? Where do I go to do these things? So really interesting take on this and where people are seeing it. And Ashley, I don't know if you've been seeing anything on your side around digital transformation, some of the clients that you're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because when you think about owning a company, you have to wear a lot of hats, right? You have to think about your marketing, you have to think about your sales, you have to think about your operations. And so while a lot of companies really value technological innovation, it's difficult to implement those systems a lot of times and to, quite frankly, go through the fact finding of finding a system that works for your company.
Yeah, fantastic. And we just got a question in here just asking how important digital transformation is at our organization or at Boast. And what we see is really trying to define that around having systems and process that is within our organization. So really not this ad hoc decision-making process or being very reactive to certain situations. Having something that's predefined, set up in organizational wide that everybody understands. That's the digital transformation we kind of strive to kind of go towards. And that could be from all of your disparate systems and process from your entire tech stack and how they all talk to each other and how they're all feeding that information together. And seeing some feedback on that, definitely couldn't scale without it. You're absolutely right, for sure. So this is just diving deeper into that. So over 60% were still using Excel as their primary tool. So here's some of the other things that they were using. So they're using some project management systems. A big thing is still email surveys. So really just like are you doing this, and sending email surveys out really to capture some of this information. So really, when I take back and I look at this, it's really, there's no solutions in the market that's really helping people solve this problem around it. And I think that was some interesting feedback that I got from the survey. I don't know if you saw anything interesting else with that, Ashley.
Yeah, I think the fact that people are still using Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets to put together calculation claims is something we see pretty common in the R&D credit world. Typically, our steps are to review this information because it can be prone to error. Part of working at a company like Boast is that we are R&D tax credit experts and can account for those differences within the software, as opposed to having to go through and tediously update something like Excel.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was another question we just wanted to get an idea from, after you kind of see it, and what was your level of satisfaction with your R&D tax claim process? Are you happy with it? Do you think it could be improved? And the rating was kind of around average, kind of a 5.8 out of 10. So no one was really extremely happy about it, but just kind of in the middle in terms of that whole process. And I think some of those things is also interesting when you're doing your R&D tax claim process. If you don't know there's a better way to do something, you often are happier with your process than if you know there's a better solution to do it. Or if you knew there was a way where you could add a layer of technology into helping you with this process. And I know, Ashley, with some of your previous experience, you worked at multiple accounting firms. Is this kind of consistent what you've seen over the years as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of one of those situations where once you get a provider in, you kind of stick with it because you don't want to change. And, a lot of times changing is a hassle, but you're not exactly satisfied with the work. You don't feel like you're getting that client attention that you want. You don't feel like you have somebody who can sit down with you and explain your claim and any changes that you may want to account for. Same for internally. A lot of times it can seem like this is an easy solution, but the time that a lot of people are spending to put together these claims and get together all the documentation, it can stack up very, very quickly for a lot of companies.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. So here's some of the things that we were just from some of the descriptive ways they were describing their process and how they could make it easier for their team and some of the things they could do. So a lot of people were talking about innovation or leveraging some of the data that they have in some of their other systems like Jira and GitHub and Atlassian. Those are some of the things that people were talking about in terms of solutions that they might be able to see digital transformation in. And we're starting to see that in the tax world as well. I don't know if anybody out there uses Avalara, but obviously there's a SaaS tax solution that's out there in the world, which is now publicly listed and trades. I think they've got a $4 or $5 billion market cap, so quite large. But we're starting to see digital transformation enter the world of the controller, the tax department, the finance department. And I think this is only going to accelerate going forward as we tie some of these solutions together, like Sage and QuickBooks with Avalara and some of these other tools out there to really build out a tech stack for the finance team. All right. Well, I think, Ashley, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the cost capitalization and R&D tax credits and how the challenges that we're seeing in the market? I'd love kind of to have your take on all that side of things.
Absolutely. Here at Boast, we hear you. While some of the results we got back from our survey was surprising, I would say for the most part, it's been along common themes we've been hearing for several years here at Boast. We understand that preparing your R&D credit claim and cost capitalization internally, it can be tedious, it can be manual, and it can be prone to errors. Keeping track of vendors and employees participating in development can be difficult to do on top of your normal 9-to-5 responsibilities. With employee turnover in accounting and finance departments, it can be difficult to maintain consistency in your calculation and the expenses you are reporting. Additionally, tracking down calculation papers from prior claims can be a headache. I think we're all guilty of taking shortcuts and saving documents to our desktops when we shouldn't and forgetting about them. And there's also a steady stream of new guidance from the IRS, case law presidents, and state taxing authorities affecting R&D and cost capitalization claims that are often unnoticed and unaccounted for when preparing claims internally. We designed our Boast app here at Boast to specifically provide solutions to these problems. One overlooked problem we frequently encounter with clients is not only are they using a manual process to calculate their credit and cost capitalization, but their processes aren't built to grow and scale with their company and its changing needs. So our software removes that manual burden and changes that are facing a growing company, and automates and streamlines your R&D credit and cost capitalization processes. Boast app integrates with a range of technical and financial systems, so there's no more email trading, looking for, requesting different documents. Everything is uploaded and retained for easy access for your team. So this not only saves you time now, but also in the future, as it provides you with one consolidated repository of information should you ever have any questions about your claims. Further, you can use this information to draw key insights to the productivity of your R&D spend and how much the company is recouping for various R&D initiatives. So by trusting our team here at Boast, you can take that manual process, which can often take up to 2 weeks of normal work time, like we just talked about, those little hours spread out from a couple employees here and there, it can stack up very quickly for companies. We're able to streamline this for your team. So by integrating your technical and financial systems, our team can efficiently pull the information needed for your claim, which eliminates the need for that tedious and manual steps, such as data review and accuracy confirmation, compilation of different reporting, which may or may not be in the same format, and identification of potentially qualifying projects and activities. Another way that Boast Apps helps with some of the headaches caused by preparing R&D and cost capitalization claims is by having a team of experts here to support your company and efficiently guide you through the preparation process. Our team is comprised of experts with various technical backgrounds. I myself actually come from a neuroscience background. Several members of my team come from a software development background. I believe there's also one that comes from a chemical engineering background. So we're fairly diverse here at Boast, and we're trained to maximize the amount of credit that your company is entitled to. R&D and cost capitalization tax law, it can be very nuanced in the type of costs that are and are not eligible. So for example, with the R&D credit, there are a lot of activities that are conducted by personnel who may not be directly involved in the developmental process, but are eligibly counted towards the credit. These expenses, they're often overlooked and can lead to a significant increase in the credit generated by your company. And additionally, by having insight to the industry and tax law changes, we're able to prepare your claim within this shifting landscape to the rules and law in effect at the time of preparation, and advise you as to how these changes could impact your company's claim going forward. Then lastly, here at Boast, we're involved throughout the life cycle of your claim by providing free audit defense for our services. Seeing as many audits can happen after the fact, a lot of times several years, identifying audit-ready documents after the fact with employees, documentation policies, and systems that are changing, it can be difficult in the best of circumstances. BOSTAT prepares audit-ready documents in real time, as opposed to revisiting the claim years later. Further, knowing the types of documents that are helpful in an audit can also be challenging for companies. Unfortunately, just because a document exists doesn't mean it'll be beneficial in an exam, and can actually hurt your claim if presented incorrectly to an auditor. We work with you to identify documentation to retain, gaps in document retention, and ways to improve your documentation processes so that you're maintaining the documents that are truly beneficial to your claim. So this leads to claims that are more defensible without costing your team that extra time and the headache of saving, archiving, and compiling documents that may or may not be helpful in an exam. And then Russ, I know you're going to touch on a little bit later too, some interesting findings we saw in regards to documentation from our survey. Let's see here. And then with that, I will turn it back over to Russ to talk about R&D tax capitalization and the benefits of exploring a proactive approach.
Yeah, thanks. And obviously, this has been a hot topic recently, just with some of the legislation that's passed recently about requiring companies to capitalize their R&D costs. So as of right now, beginning in 2022, which is where we are right now, a section 174 of the tax code is saying that taxpayers must capitalize costs over 5 years for domestic research and 15 years for foreign research, beginning in the month where they first realize benefits from those expenditures. So this is a big departure from being able to expense those costs in the current fiscal year. So creating a bit of havoc because there's a lot of calculations that go into your cost capitalization component as well. What can I capitalize? What should I be expensing? What is research and development, or what is just maintenance expenses? So there's a lot of different avenues going on and different things going on, which adds the level of complexity of figuring out and calculating those R&D cost expenditures. And then how do you apply them to R&D tax credit and cost capitalization? And can you do this in an efficient way to kind of serve both purposes there? So while I do say this, there are two bills that have been introduced to repeal this legislation, but nothing's been kind of moved through it yet. And I don't know, Ashley, have you seen any new updates on this as of last week? I haven't seen any updates. It's still just sitting and stuck, as far as I know.
Yep, I believe they're both still in committee review, so it's going to be a little bit before anything happens.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is an interesting topic, which I see a lot of people get caught up on, and not all R&D expenditures are treated equal. There's obviously your R&D category, which you lump all your R&D costs into across your GL, where you're going to throw them all in there. But there's different types of R&D costs. There's R&D costs that what we like to classify as innovative R&D expenditures. And these are the expenditures that are driving innovation of your company, which are going to drive future revenue, not revenue in today's fiscal year, it's revenue in the future. And these are what we like to describe as innovative R&D expenditures. And then there's maintenance R&D expenditures. And these are expenditures that are in your R&D GNL and in that area, but that they're just routine. They're standard costs associated with your business. They're hosting costs. They're some of your tech stack costs that are just associated with your regular operation, or bug fixes that are really impacting your current revenue in your current fiscal year. And really understanding the differences between these two helps you understand what costs you should be capitalizing and what costs you should be expensing in the current year, which will be required under the new income code tax. But in addition to that, what you're really looking at is the parallels between the costs that you're capitalizing and the costs that you're associating with your R&D tax credits. There's a big parallel between this innovative R&D expenditures and using the same costs associated with those for those two types of activities within the finance organization. All right, so back to our survey. So I think the full survey, and we had a chat about that, is if you can get a copy of the entire research report. I think it was about 30 questions, the entire research report. So feel free again to reach out and we'll have that delivered to you so you can take a look at it on your own time. So, but what we're really trying to understand is how are people capturing information? And what we found is that over 75% rated a medium to high dependency on the documentation that their teams did to really pull out those R&D cost calculations for cost capitalization and for R&D tax credits. So a really high dependency there. And what we found is from a lot of our teams that they didn't have a very good process for actually pulling in some of this information. So definitely something that they want to kind of look into further, and making sure that there is a proper documentation process so you can actually apply software to calculate and automate some of these cost calculations. I don't know if Ashley, do you have anything you wanted to add on top of that?
I think something that's interesting, that I personally found interesting about this specific question was that, you know, people a lot of times use their internal systems to derive their R&D credit claim, which can be great. However, a lot of those heavy hitters that we can see towards the R&D credit. So, you know, think about your supervisors, think about your CTOs, think about even your CEOs who may provide guidance for the development team, may help come with, you know, requirements and specifications for your projects. And even people who are direct supporting your developmental process. You know, think about the person who's cleaning lab equipment for you all, or the person who's compiling notes from your dev meetings if needed. Those are commonly people who are not tracking time in your system. They won't be assigned tickets in Jira. They won't be associated with stories necessarily. So a lot of times when companies only rely on like their time tracking systems to put together their claim, there's a lot of time that don't come into consideration that working with a team of experts who are industry knowledgeable can help you identify going forward.
Yeah, fantastic. And I just got a question from Chris here in the chat. Ashley, if you could help us out with this one. Are contract workers and overseas teams included in the R&D tax credit calculations?
So when it comes to R&D tax credit, remember it's a domestic credit. So because of that, all of the employees we're including have to be here within the United States, earning a W-2 wage. And when it comes to contractors, the same thought process applies. They want you using domestic companies with the activities occurring here within the US. So unfortunately, if you're working with any sort of overseas contractors, maybe they're doing some development for you or some consulting, those are not eligible towards the US credit calculation.
Yeah, which, and to add some complexity into it, is for the cost capitalization purposes, obviously your cost capitalization, they're going to take into account all your overseas expenses and contractor expenses as well, to roll that in. So you have a delineation of where those expenditures are going to be used, and the calculation of that R&D calculation is going to differ slightly depending on where your team's located. All right. So we're really just going back in and diving into seeing if people were being reactive with their whole process, or if people were being a little more proactive with their process. So what we really like to see is a proactive approach to this. So having some sort of process that's put in place, especially if you have any interim reporting requirements on a quarterly basis, where you're going to put for some provisions on your balance sheet, you're going to want to have more proactive process where you can understand this, and also institutionalize your process and your knowledge around this, so you can get some consistency on a quarter over quarter and year over year basis. That is really done by instituting some sort of set process, where, you know, typically buying some software or some workflow automation really helps on this side of things. All right, so another key area we really look at when we look at the whole R&D cost calculation side is the productivity data side of things. So really understanding what and how well the team is building innovative solutions or maintenance solutions, and understanding the components and that dynamics around it. So just surveying some of our teams to understand what they were using. And it was really across the board. While we still saw some people over 30% or approximately 30% were still using Excel, we have a lot of early adoption for Atlassian, which also makes the Jira and Bitbucket and Trello suites. So a lot of tools in there that people could be using. Tableau or other BI solutions is another popular solution where people were building it themselves. So Tableau obviously is that open source where you can kind of build the dashboards that are relative to your business, but it does require a lot of customization, a lot of onboarding, and high expenses associated with it. Proprietary software, we saw that on the list here, that some people were building their own solutions. So custom work to build out their own productivity data. So a lot of interesting, kind of all over the board. Nobody's really solved for this problem yet. So still seeing a lot of people trying to figure out how do they institutionalize the R&D productivity that their teams are working on, so it can be structured KPIs that you can report up into the C-suite. So still a big question mark on that side, what we came from the conclusion from our research report. All right, well, that wraps it up for us here today. Ashley, did you have any other closing remarks you wanted to kind of talk about?
I don't believe so. I think really it comes down to we're finally seeing some innovation, I think, in a marketplace that's typically been pretty antiquated across the board. As Russ said, I've worked at boutiques up to, Big Four. And it's time for a change. And I think that software and innovation is a way that can really make the credit and cost capitalization more accessible to a lot of people, but also make it easier and impact and lessen that impact on your company, so that you're truly getting a great benefit that you can use for years to come.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Feel free to check us out at boast.ai, our website. We've got lots of original content and research on there. You can subscribe to our newsletters if you want to keep up to date on any of the tax code changes. We'll be publishing on that to make sure everybody is up to speed on the new legislation that's coming out, or if anything is changing. You could also feel free to book one of our experts if you have some specific questions about anything. We're looking forward to having you join one of our additional webinars in the future. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.